Hey everybody, Riot Mort here, and we are back with the patch 13.9 rundown. Can you believe it? There's only 3 patches left in this set before we move on to the next set. And yeah, so we're getting to the point in the set's life where the meta is mostly stabilizing, so there won't be a ton of changes. It's also important not to change things a lot at this point, as a lot of competitive players are reaching their regional finals, and as we head into the championship patch, which is 13.10. Yeah, so not a lot to go over, but we will go through it all. One thing to note here is also that normals has been changed to normals with portals. You can check out our learnings article about that. And yeah, so if you're looking for the for fun patch, that's already going to be available this patch. But on the ranked side of things, let's jump right into the changes. On the trait side, only 2 changes here. First off, Defender. Defender is just a little bit too much of a counter if you're willing to run it at 4 and 6, and it's really shutting out comps like Belveth, Samira, Jhin, things like that. And we'd like to see them not necessarily be pushed out of the meta by some of these comps. And so they're getting a little bit less armor at 4 and a decent chunk less at 6. Again, shouldn't change too much, but just don't want them being quite as much of a hard counter. Gadgeting has been very successful and will probably continue to be. We're letting it be a little more successful at 3 Gadgeting, opening up some options where maybe you can play it a little stronger in the early game, especially because there's another change later that's going to kind of hit Gadgeting pretty hard. And then in addition, 5 Gadgeting's cap is just a little too high, so bringing that back down from 10% per item to 9% per item. So Gadgeting overall getting a bit of a power shift, and again, there's a change later that we will talk about. All right, on the champion side, mostly focused on buffs here. Again, trying to bring the bottom champions up just a little bit. Gangplank, still kind of the weak link despite already get some buffs. And so Gangplank is going to get even more attack speed, which synergizes really well with Duelist. So this is a pretty chunky buff and should help both Duelists and Supers a little bit in the early game. Speaking of helping Duelist, after we did the animation speed buff to Kayle, she ended up just being still a tiny bit below where we want her. So we're letting her spell hit a little harder, letting her be really good with AD items. Maybe you play the carry hero augment and let that be successful in a Duelist comp. And again, both Gangplank and Kayle supposed to be a bit of a nudge to Duelist, which is a tempo comp, and be pretty good. All right, Camille. Camille kind of suffering a little bit because Renegade is suffering, and you're going to see Renegades getting some pretty good buffs throughout this patch. But also with the admin finally kind of being in the right place, has struggled to succeed. So we're going to let Camille actually be a little bit more of a disarm bot, disarming for another 0.25 seconds, give or take, as well as her spell hitting harder if you want to go the Camille carry route. And so this should give Renegades and admin a little bit more utility in their comp to slow things down. Finally, Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa, definitely the biggest outlier in the last patch. Was a little too strong. So we're nerfing her damage just a little bit, nothing too crazy here, but the bigger nerf is the spell attack speed bonus. Now, the way Kai'Sa works is the first time she casts her spell, she gains 75% attack speed for 10 seconds. But if she casts it again, she got another 75% attack speed, and that could stack. So you would see Kai'Sa's very quickly get up to like 3.0, 4.0 attack speed, despite only having like a shiv and a gunblade. So we're hitting that pretty hard, actually. That 75% going all the way down to 60%. This is going to make Kai'Sa maybe actually have to invest in things like Shojin or Ginsu's to really hit that same peak she was hitting kind of for free. This is definitely the biggest nerf in the patch that you're going to see. So this should bring Kai'Sa back down in line to a lot of the other comps and maybe make Star Guardian Emblem not necessarily a free win playing around Kai'Sa and Misfortune. Speaking of which, Forecast is the other big area of change. Nothing too crazy in here. Aatrox just getting to do a little bit more damage. He'll still be just as durable as a tank. You're still going to want to build him as a tank, but it'll allow him to help you finish fights off a little bit better, dealing damage there, and also kind of a buff to heart comps. If you're willing to invest in heart, you can get this spell to scale up a lot better. So Aatrox heart maybe getting a bit of a buff here. Garen, definitely the premier frontliner right now. People are playing him without mech, with mech. Cool, that's great. We like that. He's supposed to be a good tank. He's a 4-cost. But where he's just getting a bit too much utility and putting him over the line compared to other champions like Aatrox. So slowing down his mana generation a little bit, he should still be able to get 1, maybe 2 or 3 casts off if he's a mech. But again, just slowing that down a little bit. Jhin getting the classic 5 AD buff. Now, this might not look like a lot, but remember, this is base AD, so this scales with all of his items and things like that. So this is a pretty sizable, 8% base buff that all of his multiplicative values are going to scale off of. So should allow Jhin to maybe move up the ranks and be pretty good damage. Misfortune, the other link of the Kaisa Misfortune comp, scales really well with Quick Draw and Anima Squad. So bringing her spell down just a little bit. She gets it off much lighter than Kaisa does. We're going to lower that ult damage a little bit to hopefully put her on track compared to a lot of the other 4-cost AP carries like Twisted Fate and Nico. And then finally Viego. I think Viego has definitely been the weakest 4-cost carry for a while, having to be in Renegade. Even when you're playing Heart, you don't really want Viego. We had kind of preemptively nerfed him because we thought Heart was going to allow him to scale up, but it really didn't. He really needs that initial burst to stay alive. And so his spell is going to go up quite a bit of damage here, 8%, and he'll get an extra 50 base health to survive. And so again, Renegade in particular, the combination of the Jhin buff, the Viego buff, and the Camille buff, hopefully this makes the Renegade line a little bit more of an option as you consider, as well as everything else going on here. All right, on the Augment side, one big one we want to talk about first. Laser Core Heart, Laser Core Soul, Gadgettine Heart, Gadgettine Crest, and Gadgettine Crown can now all appear only on 4-2. So, no more 2-1 Gadgettine, hit 5 Gadgettine early, and kind of dominate from there. This is allowing us to keep the same power curve that we have right now, but not have them be so dominant in the early game. We still want them to be options, so if you're, investing in Gadgettine, building around that Gnar, you can get that +1 at 4-2, but you're not going to get the easy signaling to a really strong comp at 2-1 for both of these. And so this should allow us to keep their ceiling strong without having the Augment kind of be this bailout option. So don't expect to see those in the early game. From there, a lot of hero augment adjustments, trying to lower the bottom end and, raise the top end a little, or vice versa that. But, a few buffs and nerfs here. I'm going to run through them really quickly. Ashe carry, just a little bit less attack speed, kind of one of the better reroll comps. Lux carry, one of the worst reroll comps, getting a pretty big buff here. Nasus support, another augment that's very, very good. Small buff, or small nerf, excuse me, that should be red. Got my colors wrong there. Jinx carry. Jinx is a pretty good champion, especially in like the diamond to master elo. So lowering the carry just a little bit because she benefited really well from the buffs she got last patch. Lee Sin carry. This is an augment that after the nerf kind of dropped down. So again, very slowly buffing it up. We don't want to go back to the cleansing safeguard meta, but just a little bit of help there. Pike carry, very hard to get 3 casts in a single turn, which made this just feel like Trade Sector but worse. So we're going to make it go from 3 to 2. Maybe you can get 2 rerolls per turn there. Rel carry, this is another one I got the color wrong. Rel carry being nerfed a bit. The bonus AP going from 80 to 60. Again, we like that Rel carry augment makes her a very strong tank. You get that 35% DR, that's great. But she doesn't really need to do as much damage as she's doing, and that's what this is focused on, just having Rel carry do less damage. Yasuo carry. This augment, once we fixed the AI around it, got real good. Definitely became an S tier comp, could just delete backlines. We're happy with the AI. It gives Yasuo some time to be in the spotlight. That's great. And because of that, it probably doesn't need 20% damage amp. So we're lowering that damage amp to 8%. Still will do more damage. Still should be a very good augment, which is what we always wanted. Just not quite as dominant in backline deleting. Jax carry getting a little bit of love here. The attack speed going from 15 to 18 on the carry augment. Riven support, very minor buff here. I still don't think this will be a popular augment, but you can get a little more HP for something like your Anima Squad or your Brawlers. Garen carry. This mana reduction went from 30 to 50. You'll notice this doesn't get marked as a buff, and that's intentional. This is mostly to just counteract the mana nerf from base Garen. So if you're playing the Garen carry version of Garen, it's exactly the same. The mana is still 150. Nothing changed. That's all this is. This is compensation to put this right where it is. It's still a very, very niche augment that you have to prepare for, but if you have, it's quite good. Garen's support, on the other hand, this augment is bonkers good. Having it on the best tank is just really good. Is going to get a bit of a nerf here. This combined with the Garen nerf will certainly probably put this into like the mid tier where it belongs. Warwick Carry. This augment was basically what was enabling brawlers for the most part. So we are lowering its power so that we can put power back in brawlers in other places, like the Jax Carry augment. You'll see a small Jax buff later. But just a bit of a nerf to this augment. It was just too specific and too enabling for that brawler comp. So speaking of which, the Warwick support augment getting a little bit more starting HP, so it's not quite as hard to get it up to something like boxing lessons. All right, item side, nothing too crazy here, but we did a pass on the Ornn and Radiant items. So Death's Defiance getting a little bit more attack speed and armor, Obsidian Cleaver getting a little bit more HP and AD, and then on the other side, Zhonya's being just an insanely good item. 40 AP is really good for an AP item with a ton of utility, and 3 seconds immunity is a lot of utility. This item was really good. So lowering the AP from 40 to 30 and the armor and MR from 40 to 30 as well. It still has the 3-second immunity. It's still a great safety net. I don't expect it to be, drastically less powerful, but I do expect it to not just give you a bunch of free damage and survivability. On the Radiant side, Edge of Night gets a lot more AD, so it should be a more damaging option, and a little bit more armor. Locket of the Iron Solari, not quite as much health for your team. The shield value going down just a little bit. Protector's Vow, Radiant, gets the 60 starting mana here, so if you have a Radiant Protector's Vow, you can cast very quickly. Really good on something like a Garen. Quicksilver, more survivability and more crit chance. You already have full CC immunity with the Radiant Quicksilver, so this will help you stay alive even longer. Really good on something like maybe a Yasuo or a Bel'Veth. RFC, Rapid Fire Cannon, is now the quintessential attack speed item, giving all the way, so Radiant Deathblade gives like 120 AD, Radiant Deathcap gives 120 AP, so Radiant RFC gives 125% attack speed. Pretty cool. And then finally, Static Shiv. Remember, this hits 8 targets. So 8 targets times 75 damage, that's a lot of damage. So lowering that to 65, especially with characters like Kai'Sa and Twisted Fate using it, was just a little too good. All right, on the small side, some things to note here. Wukong getting a bit of a spell damage buff. Again, he's another kind of weak 1 cost. Don't expect this is going to change a whole lot. It is a very small buff, but maybe something like Cyclone or bring back the reroll Wukong mech that can be good. Jax getting a really tiny buff at 1 and 2 star. Part of this to compensate for the Warwick Carry augment nerf. Part of this to just make Jax a little easier to play in the early and mid game. Give mech Jax maybe some outs. But 3-star Jax we're pretty happy with, so no change there. And then the last changes are a little bit more on the for fun side. 3-star Syndra will now always cast her ability 9 times, even if her bench is empty. So she should be a little bit more of a win condition. Ultimate Ezreal also we raise his damage quite a bit, so he should actually be able to finish off champions that maybe have a Bramble Vest. And then finally, all 3-star 5-cost champions now have an additional 4,000 HP. What we were running into is something like Ultimate Ezreal, for example, that has a very big mana cost, or maybe like Set 6 Victor. You could 3-star them, but if they still got hit with like a Shroud, they just couldn't cast, right? They would take too much damage and die. And so this is to help champions like them get a cast. 3-star 5 costs are meant to be pretty close to win conditions. We expect you to win 99% of the time, assuming you're not up against another 3-star 5 cost. They can lose, that's still the intention, but this should help them lose a lot less. And then finally, a few bug fixes. Fixed a bug where Hand of Justice would re-roll a second time if you were going onto somebody else's board, so that could maybe change how you were playing around Hand of Justice. Fixed a bug where Exo Prime Selector was being created when the trait wasn't active. Pretty rare, but there you go. Fixed a bug where crowns and crests could fail to grant items if you had a full item bench. So this was getting reported a bunch this patch, but let's say you had 8 or 9 items on your bench and then would take something like the hacker crown at the end. The emblem would have nowhere to go and wasn't correctly spawning in the orb. So we went ahead and fixed that to make sure you always get your items that you should. And then lastly, 2 bugs that I think people have been talking about for a while. Gadgeteen no longer lose their bonus damage and damage reduction when Prankster procs. So now Gnar can be played with Prankster and get some of that backline access and that aggro drop that he was always intended to have. And then finally, base Ionic Spark now correctly deals zap damage. For a while, it was only giving the magic resist, or the magic resist shred, but it wasn't zapping, so that has now been fixed. And there you go. Like I said, relatively small patch, but the Kaisa nerf, the MF nerf, a few of the buffs in there, things like the Renegade buffs, should open up the meta even more than it already is. So hopefully we see a lot going into, again, a lot of regional finals as we get ready for the championship. So, yeah. There you go. All right. Another quick one. Hopefully you guys enjoy. We're almost there. Almost through Monsters Attack and glitched out. So, all right. That's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.